The Leadville 100 Mountain Bike Podcast is mostly about looking forward to, getting ready for, and getting you into the most famous out and back we can think of. But this time, Hottie, we're going to be looking back at the 2019 race and a little piece of my story that happened along the pipeline section inbound.
Yeah, looking forward to that story for sure. And I also want to look back at 2019. Or maybe I don't. You see, near the end of the year, I took a hard fall that resulted in some serious injury, surgery, and a fairly long recovery. The recovery portion included 6 weeks in a neck collar.
We need to have that as a show. That was scary stuff, Hottie. And I'm glad that you're still around and doing okay and pointed in a positive direction for 2020.
Well, one thing that helped me get the rest I needed was our sponsor, Floyd's of Leadville. You see, the CBD capsules, either the full spectrum or the isolate, were just what I needed while trying to relax. Because while doctors can put you back together, your body in large part has to finish the repair job. And to do that, you got to get your rest. That's where Floyd's came in. A CBD capsule and my recliner chair were two things that helped out a bunch.
Well, I'm glad you had both of those. Be sure to check out Floyd's of Leadville, which is our presenting sponsor for 2 seasons in a row now at floydsofleadville.com. Be sure to use the code FATTY at checkout for a 15% discount on all your orders. That's right. Last season, the discount was for your first 2 orders, but everyone likes it. And so now that FATTY code is good on all of your orders.
Oh, that is huge. Thanks again, Floyd's of Leadville, for sponsoring this show.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race presented by Floyd's of Leadville. It's season 3 already, episode 2 of the show that breaks down, builds you up, gets you ready, freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. Fatty, you have your eyes on your 24th start at Leadville this year, but sounds like you want to relive number 23 and what would become your 22nd finish.
I don't know if want is the right word, but no, it is. But I got to say, Hottie, spoiler alert or something, this is not a story where I come off as a hero, and it is not a story you necessarily want to listen to while you are eating or with polite company. Fair warning.
All right. With that little teaser, put down the donut. And let's first, though, get to a new feature of the show, the question of the week, or the question of the show, if you will. And this one... we never would have considered before this year, Fatty, and that is, will there be a Leadville 2020 at all?
That makes, I get a pit in my stomach when we even ask that question. I never would have even thought about that 2 months ago. The scariness of the COVID-19 pandemic is weirdly dovetailing with the deferral option that we had this year because of the registration debacle.
Yeah, so we ran a little poll over on that Facebook page, the LT100 Mountain Bike Participants Group, asking, how likely do you think it is that the Leadville 100 race will happen this year? And here are the results so far, at least. 62% of you think the race is likely to happen. 38% of you think the race is likely to be canceled. So there's a lot of optimism, that is, Fatty, from our listeners.
There is. I put myself in probably that 38% that felt like there is at least a 50% chance that it is going to be canceled. But the folks who feel the race is likely to be canceled this year have a really surprising and, unusual option. They can hedge their bets by deferring their entry. And to be honest, Hottie, it's a pretty compelling option if you don't have skin in the game for this particular year. If 2020 is not for some reason the hill that you are going to charge no matter what. I actually talked with one of my best friends as well as with my daughter and with her boyfriend. And for each of those three people, I made a pretty strong case for deferral, witnessed by the fact that all three of them did, in fact, defer.
Yeah, I've been monitoring the Facebook page, the participants page, and noticed a lot of folks mentioning as well that they've decided to defer, whether that be over COVID-19 or the fact that the race is looking to get people to defer due to the problems they had with registration. But again, I think deferrals are probably up. Now, the question is, Fatty, have you deferred?
No, I have not deferred, and I am not going to. I take the number of times that I've finished this race pretty seriously. So if there is any chance at all that the race is going to happen this year, and I personally, and I don't have any math for this, but I feel like there's about a 4 in 10 chance that it is going to happen. And assuming Lisa and I are well enough to ride, we both need to be well enough to ride for me to go out there. She's sick, I'm not going. And if I'm sick, I assume she's not going. I guess I'd have to ask. But if I'm recovering, obviously, I reserve the right to convert my Niner Air 9 RDO single speed back into a geared bike. That seems like a fair thing to do.
Sure. And if gears are a cure for COVID-19, then I reserve the right to become the head of the CDC and prescribe gears for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'll be vice chair. So there have been a lot of interesting comments in that poll that I put up, and these aren't representative, but I thought it would be worth looking at a couple of them. And then maybe I had a couple of questions for you and my own opinions that go along with the whether this race will be raced this year, and ask should the race be raced this year? So, kind of a little bit different questions. But first, let's get to some of the comments. Peter Jerko posted, it won't be up to the race organizers, but rather the city and the county. If the race was scheduled on April or May, I would say will definitely be canceled. Yeah, he's for sure right there. Mid-August might be far enough out that I think there's a 50-50 chance that it gets canceled. And I think that is that is an important and valid point. There are a number of people who are out there saying, "Oh, you need plenty of grit and determination, and don't be so worried about a little thing." The fact is, if Lifetime cancels this race, it isn't going to necessarily be because Lifetime doesn't want to do the race. It will be because Colorado or the United States government or the city of Leadville simply cannot countenance bringing a group of people together for a race.
Yeah, I just came from the Mid-South in Oklahoma where, again, the decision to race was helped by the fact that local government gave it the green light. At the last minute it did, but it did, and they went on with that race. Now, there's an alternative point of view here. It comes from our listener, Lee Hewitt, who says, hey, why don't we simply delay it for a month? In other words, get out in front and decide early on, delay it for a month. I like this idea because it keeps athletes pretty much on track as far as peak fitness is concerned. It probably means, though, if they do delay the Trail 100 mountain bike race, the trail run will also have to be rescheduled. So further, adding more pressure to Lifetime what they knew. But I think, Fatty, this idea also, that is delaying it for a month, has its problems.
Yeah, unfortunately it does. I think that month might be the amount of, cushion that the race might need, that there is less likelihood of there being an overlap with this pandemic. However, there is some honest, real thinking for the why this race has always been in early mid-August for as long as it's ever existed. And that is, by the time you get to mid-September, you no longer have a solid 13 hours of daylight. It's the 12 and a half hour people would be finishing at dusk, and that's not necessarily a great thing. And then, of course, Leadville is a very high mountain town, and that's why we love it. But it starts its autumn early, late spring, early autumn. It could be a muddy, slushy mess out there and not good for racing. There also, of course, the logistics of everyone needing to scramble their travel plans. I've got an Airbnb for mid-August right now, and there's the other logistics shifting as well. Places to stay, the flights, volunteers, all of that. It's a shame because honestly, I think that later the better for the likelihood of this race happening.
Yeah, the weather window's pretty tight up there at 10,000 feet.
It is.
So that's why.
Summer's short.
Yeah, the August date just seems to fit perfect. Here's another interesting suggestion from Scott Nault. He says, I think a regroup and a plan to do 2 races next year may be time and energy well spent. Nice suggestion, Scott. Funny thing about Leadville, though, it's normally a quiet town, but during their short, dry season, it gets really busy with events up there. And like I said about delaying a month, delaying a year probably means the run race is in the same boat. So not only are you trying to get the LT 100 mountain bike race done in one summer, or 2 of them done in one summer, but also 2 foot races in one summer.
Oh, yeah. Not to mention the 210Ks, I assume, right? So suddenly you go from having 3 races over the course of 8 days to having 6 races in the course of 8 days. That would be pretty hectic. Plus, you got to remember, it's not going to be just one set of people doing both, doing the Leadville 100, 2 days in a row or whatever. It is going to be, one group of people doing the this hypothetically deferred 2020 race, and then a completely different set, or at least an overlapping set of people doing the 2021 one. Where's everyone going to stay?
Tough one. Real tough one. Yeah, logistics. Well, Fatty, the fact is there's no way for us to even pretend to know which way this will go. And while we at the Leadville Podcast would normally reach out to Lifetime and ask what direction they're going, this time we didn't even bother. There's just no roadmap for this thing right now. No contingency plan of record.
Yeah, you have to imagine that, Chemo and, Ken Klober and, Michelle Duffy and all the folks who spend a lot of time thinking about races, they never thought, well, what would we do if there were a pandemic? And one that, we have no idea of how long and how badly it is going to affect things. Right now, honestly, I think probably the kindest thing that we as a podcast and probably most racers can do is give them the space to figure this out the best that they can. You'll remember, last time we did a show, we asked Michelle at Lifetime about the Austin Rattler. And at the time, they were planning on doing it. It was, of course, a few days later, postponed. So things change fast. And, all that said, we're, of course, going to keep giving our listeners info as if there will be a start at the 6th and Harrison intersection, whether that is August 15th or some other date. And, even if it's 2021.
Let's keep moving forward, even though it feels like we're standing still right now. Fatty and I intend to give you information you can use this August or a little later in the summer or next year if need be, whatever happens. So keep listening, keep training while keeping your distance and keep doing our thing.
Yeah.
If you haven't been over to thefeed.com lately, we really encourage that you go back, take a look. The Feed continues to expand their line of nutrition and their scope of what they cover. They've moved well beyond what we put in our jersey pockets and bottles, and now they have a huge line of really great wellness products.
Exactly right, Fatty. The Feed has products to help with mood and stress, gut health. They've even have CBD supplements on the menu, including stuff from Floyd's of Leadville. Their vitamin section is particularly impressive. The Feed is now offering Goose Magnesium Supplement. I'm a big fan of magnesium to help prevent cramps. Magnesium is a mineral that we sweat out by the boatloads when we're training. A good diet and a supplement is a good way to make sure you don't run low.
I use magnesium to help me sleep at night. I don't know if you've noticed how that affects your sleep, but sleep is so important, and it seems to me that it does help me. Anyways, the Feed is back as a sponsor for Season 3. We're so grateful that they are, and the same code works that has always worked, thefeed.com/Leadville. This year, instead of us just trying to guess what you as our listeners might like based on what works for Hottie and me, instead, just go to that URL. That is, once again, thefeed.com/Leadville and sign up. You'll enter in your email, and then they're going to send you back something for how to get your 15% discount, whether you like Goo Magnesium or Morton Energy Drink or Bonk Breaker Bars or Scratch Chews. And I like all of those, and especially the new Morton Gel with a ton of caffeine. I'll talk about that another time. no matter what you like, thefeed.com has got it, and it's got it at a great price. And that's, once again, thefeed.com/Leadville. Sign up for the 15% discount. All right, Hadi, I've got a story to tell. Or more to the point, I have some story to tell that I intentionally left out of my 2019 race report, which was, for those who'd like to go back for context, the season 2, episode 23 of this very show.
I actually remember that show, but you've got me here. You left something out of that race description?
I did. When you and I sat down in the little cabin that I was renting in Leadville a couple of days after the race, and I told you my story, I very specifically left something out. It was, in fact, my sharpest memory of the entire day, and I just wasn't ready to tell people about it.
And why would you do that?
And because it wasn't pleasant and it was embarrassing. And to be honest, I'm not sure I will ever have credibility as a Leadville, air quotes, expert after I tell this part of the story. But, you know, it's a weird, serious time in the world. And I think we could stand to have something a little weird and not serious.
Yeah, so let's loosen things up. Go for it. I mean, set me up with this terrific story.
All right, so here is the setup for my little 10-mile debacle. If you head about 40 minutes for background into our season 2 episode 23 race recap, that's the part where I'm talking about me coming back into the Twin Lakes Dam alternate inbound, and seeing you the second time, and then racing out to Pipeline inbound. In a very short period of time, maybe a sentence or two, I mentioned that the headwind was pretty mild and nothing else, except for I say that Melissa, my daughter, was pulling out of Pipeline inbound as I pulled in. And I didn't talk about how she had magically gotten in front of me. Because I had mentioned earlier in the race that I had I had passed her at the beginning of the race. So just kind of, let that whole 15-mile section magically vanish.
I've wondered about that whole hopscotch thing. Like, how did she get ahead of Patty? Well, I don't know. I'm not out there. Got to be some explanation.
Yeah, and normally it's something that I would talk about because the passing of people and the conversations that happen when, as people are passing and catching and hopscotching, that's the magic of the race as far as I'm concerned, the human interactions. But this all happened in a normally uneventful 15 miles of the course. If you Strava stalk me, you'll notice it took me about 10 minutes longer than normal to get from the Twin Lakes Dam mat to the Pipeline mat. And that's in spite of the fact that usually I stop right after that mat to get crewing help. This year I hadn't, of course, because you were crewing for me before that mat at the Twin Lakes Dam alternate.
Right. So the plot thickens here. You were having a good day up to that point. In fact, I remembered. Yeah. I remember you leaving Twin Lakes Dam. I thought, it looks great. You should have been, a couple minutes faster on that segment when you go from Twin Lakes Dam out to the Pipeline feed.
Yeah, you would think so. So basically, 12 unaccounted for minutes in my race. And it is not a pretty 12 minutes. And it's not something listeners, as I mentioned, will necessarily want to play on speakers if there are other folks around.
Well, nobody is supposed to be in public right now anyway, so feel free.
Yeah, I guess so. We're all on either lonely speakers or headphones. Okay, so let's just get right to it.
Well, you know what, Fatty? Let's keep the suspense going on this for just a second before you dive into this story and talk about one of our sponsors, because maybe they want to be in front of the story instead of behind it.
I think so. And it will also spare me the embarrassment I'm going to give myself for another 60 seconds or so. So I'm good with that.
The first year Fatty and I met up in Leadville, long before this podcast became a reality, Fatty was a blogger with a little site called fatcyclist.com.
Yeah, what a surprise. I would name my blog after me. Or did I name myself after the blog? One of those two.
Yeah, but the real surprise back then was something you gave me, and that was a coveted Fat Cyclist jersey. It had the Clydesdale logo on it and the website URL, and I still wear that jersey to this day. In fact,
nice.
It is probably the jersey I have that draws the most comments from other riders. It's great looking, has a great fit, and it is made by a sponsor new to our show, Fatty.
Yeah, they're here for season 3. The company is DNA, which stands for Dirt and Asphalt. And I've been working with them for years. Good friends, riding buddies, everything. Their specialty and the reason I turn to them for my Fat Cyclist gear is their custom jersey department. DNA can design you and make a custom sewn kit for your club or, whatever it is you're promoting at the Leadville 100 or any other event. We are huge fans of DNA Cycling here at this podcast, and we are super happy to have them as a partner to the show.
And DNA is offering a 10% discount to our listeners. Just go to dnacycling.com, and in the custom apparel inquiry page, choose Other in the Where Did You Hear About Us drop-down menu. Then type Leadville Podcast.
And if you are not making your own kit, stay tuned for info on how you can get ours. Either way, you're going to look awesome on race day. Okay, Hottie, now I'm going to take you through my missing 12 minutes. Up to this point, things were just going so great. I mean, they really were. I am just hauling, as you saw, through the Twin Lake Dam alternate. I think you actually pointed out, you said, you're ahead of schedule. I got in there before I had even expected to, and I felt like I was not just racing fast, I felt like I was racing smart. I was thinking that there was an 8:25 possibly in my future, which was, 15, 20 minutes faster than the 8:45 I had publicly hoped for. And as you know, anytime you go across the Twin Lakes Dam aid station, right as you cross that dam, the crowd's always really wild, and I love that. I'm egging them on. I'm, raising my hand, and I'm doing, I'm shouting at them, and they are shouting back, and I'm just feeling so good. And I'm, just feeling like, I am having a banner day. It was one of those rare days when things are going perfect. So, you cross the pavement after going through, going along the little dirt road. Cross the pavement, there's always a marshal there who sort of holds up traffic for you. Still feeling great, and the day's starting to get a little bit warm, and there's a paved climb for a few minutes. And that's where a lot of people sag, because suddenly, instead of you going downhill, you're suddenly hitting uphill, and it's hard. And it is warm for the first time during the day. And maybe you're a little bit in a calorie and fluid deficit, but I'm okay. And I notice I'm still wearing my arm warmers, and they're these nice white with sort of a blue pinstripe Rafa set I'm pretty attached to, but I do not want to hold on to anything. I do not, I don't want to carry anything I'm not using. And I'm like, I'm going to give away these arm warmers. So there's a kid on the side of the road. I pull off my arm warmers and I toss them to him. I say, here, free arm warmers. And, that's kind of an expensive thing to do. But when you are racing, you're not necessarily thinking. I just didn't want those stuffed in my pocket for 15 miles. Then I crest that climb. There's always a few people sort of doing an unofficial crewing. Have you noticed that before? There, people sort of crewing right as you get off the pavement for folks, and I'm never sure whether that is legal or just sort of just something people do. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I have noticed that section. it's in some instances on the pavement, I feel like there are locals just turning out, cheering people on, but I do see hand-ups going on. I'm like, usually I'm so delirious there, and I don't know why, because you've had a break there at Twin Lakes, but it's weird about Leadville. The two spots that kind of kick me in the head are both paved climbs. It's that one coming away from Twin Lakes Dam, usually back towards the pipeline, and then, of course, the one headed around May Queen and up to the alternate feed zone before you get back onto Keevens inbound. So, but I have noticed those people there. I've often wondered, hey, what's going on here? And how did you get here? And you're not really supposed to be here handing up food and drink.
Yeah, they're always super supportive of everyone going by. So I don't mind that they're there. And sometimes I've thought, I had to take advantage of that myself. I mean, it would for sure be the easiest place to crew from. But regardless, as I went by these people, I suddenly had a moment, just sort of a gurgle in my stomach, and didn't think about it at first. But then another minute or two later, as I go around what is affectionately known as Coach's Corner, just a gurgle. And 2 minutes later, I knew I had a problem. And there's sort of the shift in how I feel, right? I'm no longer thinking about, I am on my way to a banner day. I'm thinking, my stomach does not feel good. And there is sort of a pressure, if you know what I mean. And it's not a great feeling to have when you've got 3 hours of racing left in the day. And then, as I drop down on the dirt, off the dirt, and it's sort of washboardy, and you kind of feel that in the saddle, especially on a hardtail. I am thinking, this is going to be a problem. And 5 minutes later, that problem I knew was going to be serious. And that part of the Leadville 100, it's not like you're really in the trees. The highest cover around you is maybe 18 inches to 2 feet high. There is not a lot of place for you to just discreetly go off the side of the road. And it sort of became my universe at that moment. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to be getting off my bike at some point. And I'm thinking, maybe I can make it to the pipeline aid station where there's several porta potties, and I'm sure I could grab one and use that. And then we turn onto the single track, and there's some climbing and you're shifting around, and I knew at that moment I was not going to make it to the porta potty at Pipeline. I had a fuse lit, and it was a short fuse, and time was kind of the essence, which is a good time for me to talk about something else for a second.
Dun dun dun.
Yeah, let's talk about Shimano. How about that for a second?
Okay, let's take our minds off things. Let's play this little trick we all do when such an emergency arises. Let's play mind games and think about something else, like Shimano.
Because having a good day at Leadville, trust is a key issue. You got to trust that your stomach is going to be okay. You got to trust in your training, and you got to trust in your equipment. And as far as shifting and braking goes, there is absolutely no more trustworthy company than Shimano.
For sure. Reliable is not a sexy word, but who's sexy when they're on the side of the trail with a broken chain or a failed caliper? That just ain't cool.
No.
And it's why Shimano focuses so much on making sure their stuff comes through in the most trying of conditions. Brakes, especially. I mean, the last thing you want is to get to Leadville and during the week, or worse yet, during the race, have some type of brake issue.
No.
You want that set it and forget it mentality that Shimano offers.
Yeah. And this year, I'm, of course, not hopefully going to be doing any shifting at all. Because of course, single speed again, and I will, we'll talk about that again in another episode, but you can bet the slowing and the stopping and a reliable, great chain, all of that is due to Shimano and especially XTR. Just love their brakes. Love the way that a drivetrain feels with XTR.
Yeah, Fatty, I got on your bike after last year's Leadville, and everything was still working great, most notably those stoppers. Yeah. So go to bike.shimano.com for more. We will also have a link in the show notes for this episode at Leadville100podcasts.com.
Yeah. Just as sort of by the way, Lisa is going to be riding that exact same bike this year at Leadville with all of those XTR components. So we are both going to be on XTR this year. So I left you as we were turning off the pavement. I'm on single track and the fuse is lit. And I have one overreaching question about racing in this low, exposed, wide open to the whole world single track with people in front of me and behind me and honestly to the left and right of you because the single track just kind of wides around. And I don't care about any of that because I have one thought on my mind, and that is, where can I go and take a poop? It was not, and honestly, the question is not the right word for it because it was not a question. It was, as I have mentioned, a lit fuse. Let's call it at this point, a 1 minute fuse. And I am on the very small section of single track that is rooty and it's surrounded by trees. And it is, honest to God, Hadi, a Leadville miracle. I've never thought about that section before. And the fact that you are very briefly and very fortunately, in a little bit isolated of a place. So I take advantage of that. I veer right off the trail and I'm still riding and I jump out of my pedals. And, everyone's done that before, usually when you're falling. But I step out of my pedals and I let my bike fall to the ground, still rolling. And I am running down the slope and looking over my shoulder to see that I am finally out of sight and where people can't see me. And of course you can still hear them because you're not that far away. And I see a fallen log and I run toward that. And I'm tearing off my helmet and I'm tearing off my jersey and I'm just leaving it all strewn behind me. I've got bibs on and I have to, there's a lot of undressing that happens.
Okay. So we get the picture here. Full striptease going on in the middle of the Leadville Trail 100.
Oh, yeah. Fortunately, with no audience, at least that I'm aware of. And the important thing is, and I'm going to maybe do a little bit of fast forwarding here, made it to the log, took care of my business. And now I had one regret and one question. And the regret is that I had given away those arm warmers.
Yes, Rafa arm warmers, no less.
Yeah, but
and the question was?
The question is, am I more of a glove guy in this circumstance or a sock guy?
Oh, no.
So, which are you, Hadi?
One thing I carry on, at least on most trail and training rides, and it's become the norm in races too, and maybe this is a new one for all of our Leadville races out there. I tend to carry a hanky, one of those
so you're
cowboy-style hankies. Yeah, not in anticipation of this. And I'll have to say, too, in camelbacks, when I do ride with those, there is some mountain money in those. I keep that in those
Yeah.
You would expect it in a race, obviously, and you're hoping your sympathetic nervous system takes over. That's usually why these attacks don't happen is,
right.
Your sympathetic nervous system takes over. So I would say hanky is the more of the type of guy I am. But given your circumstances, let's see, sock or glove? Glove? Question mark?
For me, it was actually, let's take another break before we get to that. Let's talk about envy.
Okay. Fatty, let me avoid answering that question first by saying, during my travels to the Mid-South Gravel event in Stillwater, Oklahoma, I got some podcast listening in, and one of the shows that I caught featured a good friend of ours and a friend of this show, and that is Neil Shirley of Envy.
Yeah, Neil is such a great guy. Anytime I have a question or need to talk with someone at Envy, I think both you and I call Neil. He's been on podiums for pro races, road and mountain bike, and he knows how to go fast.
Yeah, so Neil was interviewed about his recent trip to the north of France to experiment with tubeless wheels and tires and the cobbled roads used in Paris-Roubaix, which unfortunately is canceled this year, but nonetheless, they were out there working on this, and Neil was along for a little examination. Some of Envy's sponsored pros did back-to-back tests comparing the tubeless setup to tried and true tubulars, Amazingly, the pros favor the tubeless Envy AR wheel to an Envy tubular with a similar tire. They simply said they were just faster with tubeless on cobbled roads, no less. And even more amazing, one pro dropped his pressure to just under 40 PSI on a road tire and wheel, mind you.
Man.
And he never got a flat, never had a blow off.
That's incredible. That is some real confidence-inspiring wheels. We know this is a mountain bike show, of course, guys, but this just goes to show you the levels Envy pursues to put out a high-level tubeless system. And you can bet that technology in the AR tubeless wheels that perform so well in the field test not only can be found in Envy's mountain wheels, but the idea of hookless beads started in that lineup.
Yeah, you can learn more about Envy's wheels and components, many of which seem like they're made with the Leadville 100 in mind, but which can pretty much handle anything you throw at them on any terrain. Go to Envy, that's ENVE.com.
Yeah, definitely going to be building up my new single speed with Envy M525 wheels. So I'm going to go back to my story here again, Hadi, and I'm teasing it out. And honestly, this is not the part that is the most important, but I am a gloves guy. At least I was decided I'd be a gloves guy the first time because I fully expected I'd be needing to make another emergency stop during the race when this kind of thing happens. It's generally not a one-time thing, but it's, let's put all of that aside and imagine for a second that I am now done and have cleaned up as best as I could and have my jersey back on and helmet and all of that. There was a little bit of collecting here. And up to this point, basically, this is an inconvenient emergency with a pretty lucky resolution. And so I run back to the trail and I don't see my bike.
What?
I am back at the trail. People are going by. Zoom, zoom, zoom. Everyone's racing, and I can't find my bike. And so I think, I came back too far down the trail, and so I start running up the trail, retracing, heading back toward Columbine, so to speak. And I cannot find my bike. And I am panicking now, and I am running up and down the trail, 100 feet this way, 100 feet that way. And I am starting to ask myself the question, am I going to be the first person to have to quit the Leadville 100 because he has lost his bike in the middle of a race? And I honestly, Hadi, I was dreading seeing you at the finish line, coming up in a truck or, having gotten a ride and say, I don't know where my bike is, and having to tell this story. And finally, I remember I had rolled off the trail, on my bike, and just sort of let it, sail off on its own because I was in such a hurry. And so I start heading a little bit back more, and all these trees look exactly the same. And it took a while, and it felt like it took forever. But eventually I see that M5 bar, this would be a terrible ad spot. The Envy M5 bar, it can help you find your bike. So I find my bike finally, and I take off. And somewhere during this whole ridiculous experience, this 12 minutes of urgency and terror, Melissa passed me. And I am so glad that she did not see me as I am running around, panic-stricken, up and down the trail, looking for my bike. It would not have done a ton for my wise father figure image. So after that, I was riding fast and, huge adrenaline hit, thinking, I've lost so much time. And I hadn't really looked at my GPS to figure out how much time it was. Now I can sort of diagnose, it was 12 minutes. But back then I was like 20 minutes, half an hour. Who knows? Am I still going to get a sub 9? Is that even possible anymore? And I'm worrying also about my stomach. When is this going to hit me again? But the reality is, all I had lost, in all of that was 12 minutes and my gloves between Twin Lakes Dam and the pipeline inbound. And I did not have any stomach issues again for the rest of the race. I felt great. Eventually finished with, I think, an 8:38 or 8:39. It would have been great if I could have finished with an 8:20 something instead of an 8:30 something. But the fact is, an emergency, 12 minutes, and I've been too embarrassed to talk about it until now.
How about Melissa Rollins, 23 years young, Salt Lake City, Utah, crushing it out there today. Way to go, Melissa. Look at that, hand in hand there with Eldon Nelson at Alpine, Utah. Grand Rapids, Michigan.
The question, Hottie, is why? What happened? Why did my stomach suddenly go from fine and great, and I know what I'm doing, to huge, minor emergency that meant I had to lose 12 minutes of my race, right in the middle of this thing? Where did that come from?
Well, I mean, first of all, has this happened to you before?
One time. Yes, it has happened to me before.
Yeah.
In the Crusher in the Tusher, at about, I forget, about, let's say, 3/4 of the way through the race, I had to dash off trail. And that time, too, I also donated a pair of gloves to the ground.
Yeah. And the other question is, theories come into bound here. You always want to ask yourself when something like this goes wrong and you're trying to diagnose, if you have a medical, this is what doctors do. Like, what did you do different? Did you do anything different? Did you change anything? We know that Twin Lakes Dam alternate was different for you this year, but anything about all the time leading up to your emergency, anything different about what you did that day compared to other years at the Leadville Trail 100?
Yeah. Honestly, my food has always sort of been a lockdown thing, and I'm really good at that. But I did do one thing different. Based on some sort of hero worship with Magda Boulay, who is one of the GU pros and, a colleague of Roxanne's that we've had on the show many times. And she loves the green tea flavor of their Roctane drink. And I sort of added a couple of bottles of that mixed in to the Mortons that I had been using through that. And maybe that was it. Maybe that hit me like a ton of bricks. I had added it for a couple of other rides in just shakedown rides, making sure that everything was okay, and it had no problems. But, maybe, under race conditions, the first time I've ever used it in race conditions, this one new thing mixed in with other things that I'm used to, maybe that did it. Or, maybe it was the chicken I had eaten the night before. Maybe that hadn't been cooked thoroughly enough. I don't know.
Did you take a hand up from any stranger, any water, anything that out of your controlled zones?
No, sorry. You were the only one who had given me anything during the race up to that point. And then, after that, of course, that doesn't really enter into it.
Tom Dumoulin, professional rider, had a famous incident, more embarrassing than what you're discussing, during the Giro d'Italia, where he pulled over while wearing the leader's jersey on live television, surprised the announce crew, the entire race, the race officials, and did exactly what you were saying, but in a much more public way, on the side of the road during a road race, with a helicopter overhead, with the leader's jersey on.
Oh.
And later, just like you, was just very frank. Like, he just said, look, I had to take a dump. He said that in his post-race interview.
Yeah.
And it took them a while to figure it out. Like, he eventually figured out that he has a bad reaction to certain carbohydrates, like certain carbohydrate combinations, the simple sugars that we're finding in some of our gels and chews just do not agree with his gut, with his stomach. And after much trial and error and research, they were able to diagnose what caused his problem and what he needs to stay away from. So I suspect you might be in the same boat. You may want to compare notes with your Tusher experience and this past one and figure out, okay, were there any similarities there, maybe hidden in the ingredients?
I wonder if it is a too much caffeine thing. It's And honestly, yeah, it's not necessarily the kind of reaction that I want to try to duplicate ever again. But I know for sure that I'm not the only person who has ever had issues during the race. And in fact, I mean, if you listen to the race story that Jonathan Lee tells on his Trainer Road podcast, he had issues. He was a little bit luckier. He had a couple of the little towels that one of the trailside folks had been handing to people to put on their head and help cool down. He had kept a couple of those, which was wise. And another friend of mine had issues too. It happens often enough that it is a not bad idea to carry something to clean up with, so you don't wind up losing your $60 gloves during the race.
Yeah, and Dave Zabriskie, folks, go back and listen to our show from Leadville from last summer. Dave Zabriskie reveals the whole system he tried to put in place for, I think it was his first or second Leadville, where he was trying to make sure that he was relieved before race time. His methodology, unfortunately, was delayed and attacked him as he was Twin Lakes outbound, resulted in an embarrassing moment for him. But again, it's worth, I mean, all these stories, yours, Fatty's, Tom Dumoulins, Dave Zabriskie's, Jonathan Lee's, whoever it is, they're all worth sharing because, look, this is one of the things. I mean, Leadville starts very early in the morning, and getting your system primed and done with whatever it needs to do before the gun goes off at 6th and Harrison is, I mean, it's an important part of the race to make sure that you can ride the whole thing without a bathroom stop or an attack or what have you. And I know we talk about preparing for everything, but this is another one of those things that I think during training, folks want to kind of, especially in the lead up to the race, they want to make sure that their timing for a 6:30 start is, ready, that they've got it down, that they know what it takes to make sure that, okay, my gut is emptied out and I'm ready to move forward for 8, 9, 10, 12 hours, whatever it's going to take. And that, of course, also that we're in touch with those things that set us off, and to make sure that they stay out of our diet on race day.
Yeah. Well, I am definitely going to do a little bit more experimenting this year. And I'm also going to remember that just because someone who I really admire, Magda Boulet in this case, who loves something and has had good experience, doesn't mean that I am necessarily going to have the identical experience. And I think our listeners need to take that under consideration as well, that just because, you and I love and have talked about Morton stuff before, it doesn't mean that the first time you should use it is on race day. Make sure you have used it and are comfortable with it and that it works for you. Anything and everything you've used, make sure you've got experience with it and that you've used it all together even, I think is an important part, because there's some art and science in what goes into your system, and unfortunately what comes out of your system during race day. I feel good that we've talked about and have had the poop episode of this podcast. Well, let's never do it again.
Look, it's a topic that does come up for people. I know it's, I know it's something they think about and worry about too, leading in the race day. Yeah. All right, let's wrap up season 3, episode 2 of the Leadville podcast, presented by Floyd's of Leadville. If you like the show, give us a 5-star rating and a review over at Apple Podcasts. Also, share it with your other cycling friends and support our sponsors. Please let them know you appreciate them making this show possible. Meanwhile, if you have ideas or questions for us, head to the Leadville100podcast.com comment section and get in touch.
Yeah, for sure. Do that. Follow us on Twitter. I am @FatCyclist and Hottie is @MichaelHoughton. You can also find us very often on Facebook in the Leadville 100 MTB participants group. We're going to keep doing those questions of the week. Love to get your comments, and they may well, in fact, find their way into the show. We've also fired up a Slack workspace, and we will have more to talk about that in the future.
Good luck in your training. Thanks for listening, and we will see you at the start line.
Or if necessary, in the woods.
I needed to take a dump and yeah, I could not hold it anymore. It was after first time Stelvio I started to feel it in the downhill, and yeah, I just had to stop. It was not possible to continue anymore.